Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of the Fishing Teacher, and much appreciated you guys checking out today's video and hanging out with me for a little bit. We're going to be talking about how to fight a fish that's barely hooked. It's like if you see a fish jump out there and you see it's barely hooked, or you see it swimming by the boat and it's got one hook in it, sort of what you can do to get that fish in the boat successfully. So we're going to get into it today. Also, guys, thank you very much, everybody out there that's taking time to hit that subscribe button here to the Fishing Teacher. Really appreciate that. I'd like to invite everybody to please hit it. And also, guys, please check out my Fish of the Moment lake map breakdowns and my solar bat link. We only got a couple more days left in the sale, the April sale on my solar bat sunglasses. I'll link all that stuff in the description if you guys want to use that. It's a good way to support the channel, so much appreciated. Okay, guys, this is something I have a lot of experience with because I've had a lot of fish that have been barely hooked, and some of them have got off, but a lot of them I've been able to get in the boat through a system that I sort of developed that really maximizes your chances of getting in as far as getting one that's barely hooked. Now, we're talking primarily about treble hook lures, because if you have a fish hooked on a worm or a jig or something like that, you can't really tell how well that fish is hooked. So you can't, utilize the techniques that I'm going to talk about on a single hook lure. Any single hook lure, you simply can't tell if the fish is hooked good or not. I'm talking about mainly stuff like crankbaits and jerk baits, top waters, and all that type of stuff. Now, I'll give you guys a prime example. Yesterday, what happened, I was fishing that BFL tournament yesterday, and I hooked a huge bass, and the fish jumped, and I got the fish in eventually. It weighed almost 6 pounds. But when the fish jumped, it had my jerk bait in its mouth, and I could see the entire jerk bait was out of its mouth. There was one barb of the back hook in its mouth here. And when that fish jumped, I had no idea if that hook was in real good or if it was just barely in a piece of skin. You don't know. If you just have one barb in a hook, even on a treble hook, the odds are you're going to get that fish in if that hook is penetrated well, but you don't know if it's in a piece of skin or it's how well it's penetrated. You just don't know. So the point is when you feel or you see or you're aware or whatever that a fish is barely hooked, here's some things that you can do with it. First thing that you have to do, and we've talked about this before, you have got to learn to back reel, guys. Because just like yesterday, that big one that I caught, if I would have had my drag on there, there's no way that my drag the drag cannot react as quick as I can by back reeling a spinning reel, because I can put the slightest amount of pressure or as much pressure I want to have if I have my drag locked down and I back reel. If you have a drag on there and that fish is barely hooked in the skin, unless you have that drag turned down so light that you can't even reel over it, you can probably lose that fish because there's too much tension even on a drag. So we've talked about this on my other videos before, guys. Learn to back reel a spinning reel and do it often, and don't rely on your drag. I don't care how good your drag is, how buttery smooth your drag is, it cannot compare with back reeling. Back reeling is the ultimate way to manipulate and land a barely hooked fish. Guys, I can tell you how many thousands of fish I've caught that were barely hooked, that I'm very aware that the fish would have came off if it wasn't. So that's the main thing. Now, on a bait cast reel, you have to learn to thumb the spool. In other words, don't rely on your drag on a bait cast reel either. A bait cast reel drag is even more unreliable than a spinning reel drag. What you want to do is you want to learn how to thumb that reel to free spool it. So in other words, this is what happens. Say, for example, I had that big fish on a bait caster. I actually caught it on a spinning rod, but here's what I would have done if I'd have had it on a bait cast reel. As soon as that fish jumped and I saw how big it was and I knew it was going to make a super powerful run, I would reel that fish in until it started turning. Now, once I'm aware that that fish starts moving in a different direction, I'm going to push the thumb bar on my bait cast reel, and I'm going to hold the spool with my thumb. And I'm going to put as much or as little pressure as I want to, because if that fish makes a run and I think it's barely hooked, I can barely touch that thumb bar or that spool line, and I can let line go out very, very easily without putting any pressure on the fish. And then if I want to tighten it up a little bit, I just push down a little bit harder on the thumb bar, on the spool of the line, and I can engage the reel, and I can do that over and over again. But learning to play a bass out by having your thumb bar pushed and your finger or your thumb is on the spool is the best way to fight a fish that's barely hooked, for sure. Now, there's a couple different things here, guys, because there's two elements here. Number one is if a fish is barely hooked, a lot of it depends on what type of cover is around. It's like if you got open water, you're free to do that. But a lot of times, if you have thick cover that's, like bushes or docks or whatever, you're really in a hard spot because you can't turn the fish. It's like, say, for example, if you see a fish heading for a boat dock, that's going to go under the boat dock and you know that fish is barely hooked, you can't try to turn that fish. You're going to pull that hook out of that fish's mouth. So one of the pieces of advice I can give you, if a fish starts to go into cover, just let it go. Let it go into that cover, and then hopefully that fish will either, peg itself, or you're going to be able to get that fish out once it tires itself out. But if you try to turn it, more than likely you're going to lose it. I've had a lot of situations before where the fish, it has got into some type of cover, and I just held the line and I didn't put much pressure on it and just let the fish swim, and eventually the fish gets tired and you can reel it up or get the fish to come in. So that's the two main thing, guys. Just learn to back reel on a spinning rod, learn to thumb bar on a bait caster, and once you practice that and learn to practice it, I mean, the best way to practice something like that, guys, is go out and fish for like catfish or carp or something that's big, and that way you can get a good feel of the power, how you can do that. But once you get good at it, you'll never go back, guys. When I'm telling you, once you get to be an expert at back reeling or using a thumb bar, spooling it, free spooling it, you'll never go back to relying on a drag before. So anyway, hope it helps out, guys, and we'll check in. So later, see you.